Yes, good morning, everyone. My name's Graham Raper. I'm from My Compliant, and welcome to this webinar, which we'll talk about certificate of compliance. Now, the background to a certificate of compliance comes from over a decade of research and information around a rental warrant fitness program. This has been in the headlines off and on over the last 10 years, with actually no real progress in developing a system and a process that essentially meets everybody's needs, accepting that we'll never meet everybody's expectations. But certainly this is an opportunity to provide a service and a product that exceeds what people have been asking for, and developing a positive framework that landlords in particular can demonstrate that their property meets the requirements of a lawful property. And we'll talk more about the terminology lawful. It comes from MBIE, and it's also within the various acts. So what it does is confirms the premise is lawful, and secondly provides a standardised livability rating for the property, which is in essence what rental warrant fitnesses have been explaining. So what we'll talk about in more detail is what is a certificate of compliance, what does it contain, the benefits of a certificate of compliance, and how to attain a certificate of compliance. So the certificate of compliance is related to rental properties, and it verifies that the premise meets the standards in the various acts. Now, interestingly enough, the word premise has now been used when referring to rental properties. It used to be dwellings, but now if you read all the literature, dwelling and premise are interrelated, but more recently they talk about a premise. So this is a single dwelling. If it's a block of rental flats, it's an individual flat. Now, within a rental property, there are a number of identified things that are required to ensure that the property is livable and it is lawful to be rented. So the certificate of compliance measures all those components. So what does it contain? It confirms that the landlord is compliant to the Health and Safety at Work Act 2015. It's a very important point to understand that every landlord is a PCBU, so operating a business, and they are required to have their own health and safety program. Both the Residential Tenancy Amendment Act, and also mentions it in the 1986 Act, and the Healthy Homes Guarantee Act require landlords to meet all legislative requirements. So in other words, to be lawful, they have to have all the relevant sign-offs and evidence of those enactments. The Health and Safety at Work Act in section 35 also talks about if you are a PCBU, which a landlord clearly is, and there are many legal opinions if you search them, section 35 requires any PCBU to meet all other and any enactments in relation to their business. So the Residential Tenancy Amendment Act and the Healthy Homes Guarantee Act define that, and when you put that together, it requires and comes up as a lawful premise. Some of the other things that are measured, for example, are whether there is appropriate council sign-off for a property that's got 3 bedrooms or 4 bedrooms, depending on what it's been rented out of. So it is actually a property that is confirmed by the council as being valid. The Healthy Homes Guarantee Act and is a bill before Parliament currently, means that landlords will also have to provide evidence of insurance of the building itself. So there's a number of things that need to be checked off to ensure that the property is lawful. And NBIE have quite a list. So a granny flat that sits underneath it, a house without being the appropriate council sign off as a dwelling is an unlawful premise. So they are critical elements of a certificate of compliance. The other elements are measuring the livability or habitability standards of the premise. Now, this is taken from the many years of research from many organisations to some of the kind of things that are measured, whether they have the hot water operational and is it at the right temperature, the light switches work, and so on, and those basic types of things that define the quality of a premise. It's more on the unlawful premise. The Ministry of Business, Innovation and Employment have got a very good piece when you research those, and just searching the definition of an unlawful premise. Now they talk in particular about, for a landlord, must comply with all the requirements in respect of building, health and safety under any enactment. So just one particular part from the Residential Tenancy Act. Some of the types of things that would become are measured as an unlawful premise according to the Amendment 2016 Amendment Act is a sleep out that's been converted as a separate dwelling. Premises with a mezzanine floor in a commercial building. So there are a number of, and they list those which make it very clear. Now, it doesn't mean to say they can't be used. It just means that they need to have evidence that they meet all the local body standards before they could be utilised as a premise. So the benefits of a certificate of compliance is that we now can provide evidence of a lawful premise, both the landlord and the property itself. Now, the penalties for unlawful premise are well defined now, and there are a number of cases currently before the Tenancy Tribunal. But a landlord can be fined $4,000 for not having all the appropriate documentation that related to a lawful premise. So, for example, if they don't have a health and safety program, it's a $4,000 fine. For rental property management companies or anybody else renting out a property knowing that it's unlawful, it's a $1,000 fine. But also on top of that, the tenant can claim compensation for the time that the property was unlawful. And a recent one in Dunedin where some tenants were successful, they claimed $100,000 in compensation. The final amount of compensation was kept confidential, but the Act says it can only be up to $50,000 anyway. So you can read into that that the residential tenancy investigation team is growing. They've received a whole lot of funding to ensure. So being lawful and being able to define that you are lawful obviously has a lot of benefits. It's also able to be used to encourage better tenants or a better descriptor. We all understand there are good tenants and bad tenants and good landlords and bad landlords. So it's a way of promoting, using it to promote, to get tenants that are coming into a property knowing that it's lawful, and therefore you would expect them to have a deal of respect for the property as opposed to something that's shabby, doesn't have any kind of documentation to define it's lawful. The attitudes may well be different. As part of the certificate of compliance utilising the rental warrant of fitness process and programs, we can define the quality of a premise. So that a brand new house, for example, that's been rented out would obviously have a higher grading than a student flat. But nevertheless, they are still lawful properties. It also helps to separate good landlords from bad landlords. Now, all the literature and feedback on the various media talk about good landlords being held to account because of the bad landlords. Well, this is another way of demonstrating that the landlords are taking care of business and operate a very good business, which is what it is. And they meet all the requirements. Those other landlords who continually snub their noses at legislation and requirements of healthy homes will have no hook to hang their hat on. We utilise independent assessors, which means it's an unbiased evaluation of the grading. We use a standard format. That format can't be influenced by rental property owners or tenants or anybody else. It's independent of anybody that has a conflict of interest within renting out a place. So it rates a home from A to F. So an F-rated place may be a place that none of the lights work, the curtains, there's no curtains hanging up, and the lights might work because there's no light bulb. So it's relatively easy to bring the grading up, but it is a quality measure. And just as an example, a standard 3-bedroom home, there's 124 points that are measured to look at its lawfulness and its quality grading. So attaining a certificate of compliance is a very, very simple process. So it's simply just go onto the iCompliance website, fill in the form out, and then once that form is filled out, an assessor from the local area, from your area, will make contact with you to arrange the next step, which is obviously arranging a visit. But it's really important to understand that before an assessment of a property can be undertaken physically, the critical elements must be demonstrated first. Now, most landlords and rental property management companies will have a file related to that, and that would need to be made available to an assessor to view to ensure that the critical elements are met before they go out and do the quality examination or assessment of the property, which then creates the two processes to combine. So we believe that the certificate of compliance meets all of the requirements of the various entities that have influence on rental property. These would be landlords and landlord organisations. We have certainly been communicating with that sector. We've been communicating with the rental unions, for want of a better word, and that sector, and government agencies to source a solution to the toing and froing of what a rental property or rental premise should look like and should be like. But feel free at any stage to make contact with us. And from the website, following this, we'll be sending out a copy of this recording to attendees so they can listen to it again and make contact with us at any time. So once again, thank you for taking the time out to have a listen to this webinar. I hope you found it useful, and I hope you agree with us that a certificate of compliance will create and does create an opportunity to promote positive premises with positive landlords that identify a quality which people understand and can work with. Thank you very much.